Sex work is bad. Campaign after campaign has focused on viewing sex work as a problem which should be abolished. But sex sells, doesn't it?
If anything like this ever struck you.
Welcome to Talking Shop. My name's Alex Hudson and I'm with Holly Howitt, a sex worker and sex worker rights activist. So Holly, what is a sex worker?
What most people might think of as like an escort or a prostitute, someone that has sex for money, is actually a really limited view of that umbrella term. But we use the word sex worker to mean anything from stripper, pole dancer, porn performer, phone sex operator, cam girl, model, masseuse, tantric massager, sex surrogate, and there's a lot of words.
That's a lot of things.
Right, exactly.
And how many of those are illegal? How many of those are...
The lines are really arbitrary, I believe, and dividing these things up. I mean, there's certain types, traditionally, just not even just in sex work, there are things that society deem as kind of appropriate and things that are inappropriate. And so there's tolerable and intolerable forms of sex work.
Intolerable forms of sex work.
Right. So, for example, there's a funny little name that we have coined for this called hierarchy. So it's like the hierarchy of it's a good word, isn't it? It's like the hierarchy of different types of sex workers, and my belief is that it's really divisive and quite destructive because we should all have quite a common goal, and that is to have better working conditions and have rights and for a totally decriminalised system.
But that's not what the government wants. There is an all-party parliamentary group report into the idea that men will be criminalised for paying for sexual services, whatever that means, we're not sure. And so you're saying that it should all be decriminalised?
I think there should be total decriminalisation across all types of sex work. And one of the many problems with bringing in a criminalised system is precisely that question: what do you call sex work? And I think in Sweden, which has the end demand model, which is sort of being pushed for here, they've settled on if genital touching happens, which is quite an unusual arbitrary line to draw in the sand. So porn performers, you know, like it's a bit of a grey area.
Because the work that you do, no genitals touch for the most part.
I do several different types of sex work, and this is the other thing about what is a sex worker: is loads of sex workers, like any other industry, you might start off, say, being a lap dancer or a stripper in a club, and you decide that that's not really working for you. You might start making pornography. In your porn, maybe you touch people's genitals, but in your sessions you don't. You might be a phone sex operator who never touches anyone's genitals, but your full-time job is in the sex industry, and you're being paid to help someone have an orgasm. So that's very much, I consider that still to be sex work. And the problem with making these arbitrary lines, one is definitely, like you say, that then the line comes down on where you sit on what side of the law. And that's incredibly problematic, because then you have one group of, you have good whores and bad whores, you know, good laws and bad laws. And
clever punnery.
and that's really problematic. You also end up making groups smaller, so you reduce solidarity.
We spoke to the government about this, and they said very much that brothels will remain illegal, which is anything more than any two or more people in the one building at any one time. So we'll put a link to that below. So you're saying that the current laws are lowering that level of solidarity and making people scared to work in groups or to talk in groups or to feel safe in their community. Is that true?
Although it's currently legal for me or any person to provide a sexual service in a property on my own, as soon as I do that with a friend, or if I have a venue owner who's there for my safety, they could then get charged for brothel keeping, or I could get charged for brothel keeping if I'm working with a friend.
But you could get a cleaner. So I looked into the law about this, and it's very much so that you could get a cleaner, or you could get I forget the phrase, but it's something like maid, whereby they can be responsible for security as long as they have a contract signed that they're not at all involved in the sex industry, whereby they can still help you out and act as your security. Does that provide you with any sense of support or any sense of...
well, it's just arbitrary laws, isn't it? It's ridiculous distinctions to make. And the thing is, at the moment, Alex, is that if if the law wants to criminalise you, they will find a way under the current laws around sex work. And if we do get the Swedish model, the end demand model, that will become even easier, and our work becomes a lot less safe because of it.
Okay, for those that don't know what the Swedish model is, we shall put a link to that also on screen at the moment. But happily, for you at least, we spoke to the minister, and the minister has said that there are absolutely no plans to introduce the Nordic model or a new law. He says that the protection of people working in prostitution or working in the sex industry are more important, and that's his focus, and it is not on changing the law at the moment. Does that fill you with confidence?
Well, I mean, the law as it stands is already making life exceptionally difficult for sex workers and clients. Obviously, my concern
How
is that
so?
Well, for the brothel keeping laws, which is exactly what you've explained. For some of the sort of attributary or accessory laws like loitering and soliciting, which means that for street-based workers, you can't spend so long screening your client, because they know that loitering is illegal, so they want you to get in the car so you can go somewhere quieter, or you're pushed to quieter streets, where you're not going to get picked up by the police.
So the average visit, according to the government, is worth to the UK economy, I think it is £5.3 billion. And
trying to work out what the sex industry contributes financially is just, I mean, it's almost impossible.
Well, the government have tried.
It's interesting, though, isn't it, that they've tried to estimate that. It's often quite a frustrating thing to hear when I talk about sex workers' rights, and occasionally you'll get someone, typically a non-sex worker, who could be in favour of full decriminalisation, because they go, oh, and think of the tax we'd get. And it's like, you're insinuating I don't pay my tax, because I pay my tax, and sex workers I know pay their tax, not to mention all the tax that we pay on all the products we buy and services we use to supplement our business. But yeah, so I think it's a totally legitimate form of industry that contributes an awful lot to our communities, to our families, and to our society.
That's not what the council says. The council, the LGA, have come back with figures saying that a majority of council staff think that strip clubs by themselves are causing a loss of vibrancy in the high street. So it's not accepted. And so what you're saying is there is this. It's probably on a scale. I think you might be right about that, but it's still seen as this debauched industry, no matter what it is. It just totally commodity.
Depends what you're doing. There's a really interesting thing that happens with people who are absolutely anti-sex work, believe that all sex workers are victims. They also believe all sex workers are women, and only the clients are only men. But they believe also that the men that would pay for such services are probably these kind of shadowy, dirty, disgraceful figures. But there's little ways of getting around that without trying to sanitise types of work. 'Cause it's very tempting when you want so desperately to be acknowledged for the job that you do, to try and convince someone of its worthiness. And you can do that by throwing other sex workers under the bus, which just isn't good enough. So it's really easy for me to say, oh no, but the job I do is like this, and my parents know, and I do activism, and it's all this really clean and nice and sterile. And it's not like those workers, like they're the whores, not me. And that's really, really divisive. So when you talk to these sorts of people, the only way that I feel like I can get them on side without sanitising myself and sort of thereby making other sex workers dirty is by looking at people who are less able to obtain healthy sexual relationships with non-sex workers, so less able-bodied people, people for whom whatever reason they haven't traditionally had access to sexual relationships. And when you start talking to people who are staunchly anti-sex work, and these poor girls that are, and these disgusting men, and they go, oh yeah, no, I guess if my son was, in an accident, and no, I would still want him to, well yes, I would love to pay a lovely young lady like you to be caring, and, so that you can get even the most staunchly anti-sex work people often round to the way of thinking that sex and sexual intimacy is a right, a human right.
But then there are a lot of people calling for the further criminalisation. So Julie Bindel, who's a columnist, we'll put a link to some of her work, saying that sex is available for £15 and you can pay a little bit extra for all of these things. And there's the Eve's charity that thinks the laws that have been proposed saying that all men buying sex should be criminalised. They've called for it because they deal with women who have come to them for help. And so they're saying the law doesn't go far enough. So Julie Bindel did a lot of research, which she's produced a study with the Poppy Project, saying that there is a lot more work to be done on this. And what do you say to that? What do you say to that sort of work, to Julie Bindel's work?
So this whole concept relies fundamentally on a radical feminist framework, and the idea that all women are victims, that no woman, and it is always women, they exclude male and transgender sex workers, that no woman would ever enter the sex industry of her own accord or choose to, is what fundamentally underpins this radical feminist belief, right? So this is, in theory, people like Julie Bindel and Mary Honeyball and other people who have this opinion, it's kind of all well and good until you get 1, 2, 300, 5,000 sex workers putting up their hand and going, oh, except me. Sorry, excuse me, Julie, I'm a sex worker, and I do choose this job. And then they say,
is that you in your privileged position, or is
well,
that
no,
you?
This is what I'm getting at. So listen, hear me out. So this is the sequence of events. Someone says, statement, fact, no woman will enter the sex industry out of their own accord. They must be victims, and we need to save them. Then people put up their hand. That's not true, actually. I'm actually a sex worker, and I'm saying that it's fine, that it's unproblematic, that actually it would be better if we had some laws, but in and of itself, sex work is unproblematic for me and for all my hundreds of friends who are sex workers. Then the radical feminist point of view then says, I think you're lying. I think you're just putting on a brave face. I think you're part of the pimp lobby. You're being somehow coerced into telling people not to save women. You're not a real feminist. You're trying to throw women under the bus. And you can say, no, really, I'm not putting on a brave face. I'm not being paid by my pimp to defend sex work. I'm an independent sex worker who believes this. If you can then convince them that no, I'm terribly sex positive, and actually not all of my clients are men, and stop being so gender binaried in this, and your view of feminism is anything but radical, you can finally get them to accept that. And then they tell you that you're not the kind of sex worker they're talking about then. You're the minority, you're the privileged few, and so you're not the person that they're referring to when they say women need to be saved.
Are you the privileged few? Or, is
privilege is a really important... Sorry, carry on.
Are you just this small group? You're saying this small group, there are how many, the government guesses there are 60,000 sex workers working in Britain. So if you are coming at it from 5,000 people, you're still in a minority. Is it a minority? I'm
exceptionally privileged in my position, right, for lots of reasons. But I want to shift this away from, because it kind of goes back to that hierarchy and divisiveness, right? I want to shift that view away from the privileged view, because let's say we could estimate what number of sex workers are not being coerced and not victims, and those who aren't. First of all, I want to totally separate trafficking from sex work, okay? Because trafficking is slavery, slavery is illegal and should remain so. The conflation of the two is extremely dangerous to both sides. You cannot call sex work trafficking. Trafficking isn't work, it's slavery. So trafficking aside, right? So then you asked me, am I just the privileged few that want these rights, So you have this whole group of sex workers, right? All the different people I told you about. And the suggestion perhaps that I am just part of this very sort of small white middle class privileged type of sex worker that wants these rights is irrelevant to the fact that not having a totally decriminalised system negatively affects all of us, including both the privileged and the less privileged sex workers. So I'm not suggesting that every sex worker has a great time, loves their job. It's really, this job, it's so, I feel so empowered. It's really, the fact that sex work should have to be empowering to legitimately expect rights is abhorrent. There are many, many jobs, some glamorous, some much less glamorous, where of course we would never expect those people not to have rights. And yes, some people do jobs for money. It's not a shock. Some people are, you know, like triage nurses in hospitals cleaning up shit and piss and vomit from people. And like, I don't think they go, oh, my job's really empowering, you know. They do it because they need to pay the bills, because it's the job that they've been called to, and not giving these people rights is, but just because you think it might be a small minority of privileged people demanding them, it doesn't make any sense.
And so that, on that interesting and kind of confusing almost, but with that, thank you very much. Thank you. It's been fascinating. Thank you, Holly.
You're welcome.
And that's all from us. Firstly, this is Talking Shop, and it's an experiment, so we don't know what's going to happen with it. Anything could happen, we don't know. Also, subscribe down here, and all of the follow, and all of the Facebook and the Twitter, and all of the things that we're on are below, so subscribe to them. And hopefully, if this experiment works, maybe, who knows, we might see you again soon.